this is not grief about my beautiful child, my two wonderful, amazing boys. I do not have grief for the amazing people they are. What I have grief for is that they have to work harder to be in the world than other kids do and other adults. And I never wanted that for them. I never wanted that for them. I wish that I could take that away from them, and make it so that they would have an easier time navigating the world.
Today, on A Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast, our guest is Sarah Wayland. Sarah is the founder of Guiding Exceptional Parents, co-founder of the Behavior Revolution, and co-author of Is This Autism? A guide for clinicians and everyone else. She provides neurodiversity, affirmative support, education, and community for parents of neurodivergent children. Welcome, Sarah. I have a dear guest that is returning, Sarah Wayland, and today we're going to be talking about grief. As we continue this grief series, Sarah and I have so much we want to share with all of you and support you and share our tools of what we have discovered as parents that have autistic kids. So welcome to Mother's Guide, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really excited to talk to you again.
And I am too. And to get started, can we revisit your personal journey with autism, starting from the beginning with your son's diagnosis?
Okay, so I have two kids who are autistic, and my older kid, we actually knew something was wrong very early, maybe when he was 2.5 or so. But we couldn't get anybody to pay attention to it until he was about 5. And then his preschool teacher said, we've been holding off on saying anything, but we really think your son may need an assessment. So he got, at that point, diagnosed with ADHD and a language delay. Then our second son was born right about that time when he got the diagnosis. I like to say my second son was a really good self-advocate. So when he was about 4, he got a diagnosis of, quote, something that will likely later be diagnosed as autism.
Okay.
I was like, so the person who gave us that diagnosis, I said, so we need services. Can you please just call it autism?
Exactly.
And he said, sure. And, I think a lot of people are afraid of the word and the impact it will have on parents. We just needed help, and I needed insurance to pay, and I needed the schools to listen. And so anyway, then we looked back at my older son, and we were like, a friend of mine actually who's a teacher, I mentioned to her that my younger son had been diagnosed, and she said, what? She said, your older son, sure, but your younger son? And I was like, I looked at my older son, and I was like, well, she is right. So at that point, we went back to the same person and said, what about the older son? We think he has it too. And he said, oh, yeah, he definitely does.
That is so interesting how that all, unfolds.
Right.
And what if you don't know exactly, but what time, what year was this ish?
Okay, so my older son was born in 1998. So his initial ADHD plus, language delay diagnosis was in 2003. My younger son was born in 2002, and his diagnosis came in 2006. And then the other one, like I said, was diagnosed just a couple of months later. And, a funny part of that story is that I think our awareness about autism was definitely increasing. And I told a friend of mine that my kids had been diagnosed, and she got me John Elder Robison's book, Look Me in the Eye, and gave it to me. And I read it, and I was like, whoa, that book was so helpful to me. So as Christmas presents that year, I gave it to everyone in our family. And at the end, I put, by the way, both our kids have been diagnosed with autism.
Oh.
And so my dad, I remember my uncle and my dad called me after they read the book and they said, so we think the only sane person in that book is actually the author.
What a great perspective.
So anyway, yeah, it is funny, but as a part of that, then my dad he wanted to be supportive and helpful. And so he said, do you have any other books I could read so I could be a better support to you? So I got him Tony Attwood's book, Complete Guide to Asperger's Syndrome. And my dad called me up about 2/3 of the way through it. And he said, Sarah, this is me.
Wow.
And I said, I know. And so he then went and got a diagnosis. And what's been beautiful about that, is he had a framework to understand his own life through that made a whole lot more sense than any other framework he had previously had. And B, he was super helpful at helping me understand what was going on for my kids. Like I'd say, Dad, like, you know, my kid is doing this thing. What do you think is going on? And he would have really excellent insights.
That is such a great story because, thinking back, I don't know if anyone else does this, but I sure do. People that I have known throughout my life, and I'm like, oh,
yes,
that makes so much sense, right?
Absolutely.
And to have your own dad come forward like that, and what a great support. I mean, that's a great story. And I'm just curious, so your boys and your dad, I'm just assuming that they were pretty close.
Actually not.
No.
Yes. And here, this is personal, but my dad is autistic and he does have moments where he has trouble controlling his emotions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we had a couple of situations where I would leave my kids in his care. Like I remember the one where I made the decision that they could never be alone together.
Okay.
So my older son had speech therapy. My dad and mom were visiting and I had them in the car with me and my younger son was in the back seat and he was a firecracker. There's no two ways about it. So my older son and I walked up to the door for him to go to his therapist. And my younger son freaked out because I had left the car. He always wanted us all to be together. He's like my little sheepdog, right? He's always herding us together. And I came back to the car and he was screaming bloody murder. I mean, just screaming. And I was like, what happened here? And I just said that, what happened? And my mom said, well, Oliver was screaming and your dad spanked him. So I don't believe in spanking. I don't think it's a reasonable way to discipline a child. And my dad didn't apologize, didn't say anything. And so I was like, oh, and like kind of all the pieces clicked together. It's like, okay, I want them to have a good relationship, but I can never just let them be alone together because my younger son does have, big emotions and my dad can't self-regulate when that's happening around him. And so I had to be there as a buffer. And they all try, like all of the kids try, my dad tries, they all love and respect each other, but I wouldn't say they're close. And I think that was partly because I couldn't let them have that relationship. It's terrible. Like I feel bad about it. And yet at the same time, I think it actually would have been worse if I hadn't put that boundary in place.
Well, I think it's great. And thank you for sharing that. I had no idea, but the fact that you're sharing that, I promise you there's somebody that's listening to this that may have a situation that may not be identical, but similar. Because one thing I've learned autism is more than likely somewhere in your genetics or family. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh, that makes sense. So-and-so or so-and-so. And that's why the autism awareness is so important. But you sharing that is great, because it's going to help somebody that's listening. Because listen, I coach moms, and one of the things, and I know you help parents too. One of the things that comes up is, I don't know how to manage the not only your own family, right, but then the extended family, the grandparents, the cousins, the this, the that, and everybody has a story. So yeah, you know, and the more we can talk about it, I think the more we're going to help each other.
Right. And I think one piece of that I hope parents take away, moms take away, is that people are complicated, right? So my dad loves me deeply. He loves his grandchildren deeply. He is human and he has his frailties. And, you know, it's all part of the same package. And so, you know, I love him in all his complexity.
Yeah, I feel your love for your father, and that's a beautiful thing to share. And thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to do that. I know. And that this is, you know, why we're talking. Why I decided to have this grief series is because we as parents get such little support. And we also, I know for myself, I can only speak for myself, is that I didn't think it was okay to talk about it. It wasn't okay for me to feel bad. It was like I felt like I was doing something bad by feeling bad.
Right.
And look, I have coached a lot of parents, and the one thing that is common is grief. Grief is part of the parenting autism journey, and it is what it is. And so you part of your grief came up with your lovely story about your beautiful dad. And can you talk about, open that door of what your experience of grief when you first received the diagnosis? What was going on?
Well,
I know it's heavy stuff.
So I'll start with my older son, because I remember that diagnosis very well. And interestingly, I think I've completely blocked out. No, I remember it now. So first we went to a neuropsychologist, and she did a full assessment, and she said we needed to follow up with a speech language evaluation. So the neuropsychologist went through everything, and she was very good at presenting the information in a way that made me feel hopeful. Right. So she was, but she was also being very real. So she did say, you know, 1 in 10,000 kids has a profile like your son. And so it's going to be hard for teachers to understand him. They're going to have a hard time understanding who he is and how to support him. And you're going to have to do a lot of work to help with that. And so, and she was absolutely right. It was a challenge. Sometimes people could only see the challenges. Sometimes people could only see the gifts. And, you know, it was the rare teacher who could really take in both parts of his profile. And I was very grateful when they could. But so when we got the speech language evaluation, and keep in mind, my research is actually on how, so I was a research psychologist before I did parent coaching, and I studied how people process spoken language. That was my area of expertise. And so language, and spoken language in particular, was something I knew a lot about. And the evaluation by the speech language pathologist, she basically said, listen, your son's ability to understand spoken language is below the first percentile. That one hit me hard. I remember just losing it.
Yes.
And at the same time, she was such an amazing clinician. Like I wanted everything she could tell me. And I was so taken out by the diagnosis that I simultaneously was like bawling and
Yes.
asking 7 million questions and writing everything down, because this is before you could like, record with your phone. Like I've learned when I'm overwhelmed at the doctor now, I just say, can I record this? Because I'm not processing a thing you're saying.
Right.
and,
Yes. Yes.
and so, but that back then we couldn't do that. And I just remember like writing all this stuff, and I kept apologizing to her. I kept saying, I'm so sorry, I'm crying, I'm so sorry. And I said, I'm not handling this very well. I remember just saying it over and over again. She just kept saying, you're actually.
Take
Sorry.
a minute. No, don't be sorry. This is why we're having this conversation, because I also, when I go back to that time, I get very emotional. It is an emotional topic, and you're so courageous for sharing your story with me. And all any of these listeners out there feel the same. We all feel our heart, our mom heart, our parent heart.
Yeah. So what she said is, you're actually handling this really well. So
Yes. And you're Sarah, we've had conversations before, and that's why I wanted you to be part of this series, because you've done, and we're going to get to that part of it too, but you've done so much work to help parents, yourself. And that is, one way that I deal with my son's autism as well, is
right.
I don't want this grief or this pain or any of it. Not to say that, and we're going to talk about joy too, but not to say that I just don't want to waste it. I want to share everything that I can share, because we know, because you're talking about it, how life tsunami, on your knees moment, that moment that you're sharing with us, it really is.
Yeah, tsunami is a good word for it, because it did knock me flat.
Yes.
And so as part of that journey, I did want to tell you that, so because I knew so much about language development and how important it was to address it early, I was very angry that we had been trying to get help for him since he was 2.5, and nobody would take our requests seriously. They're like, oh, he's clearly so bright. He's just learning on, because kids do develop so asynchronously. I don't blame them now, but
right.
I also knew that language acquisition, like you've got, a fairly limited period where it's easy, and then it becomes much harder. And that's how brains develop. And so I knew that we had wasted 5 years of that window. And that was very painful to me. So we rushed him into speech therapy, and he went 3 times a week for 3 years. And we couldn't keep that up for any longer than that. That was too much. But it really helped. I mean, one of the things I say about speech language therapy is it really, really helps. Like my son went from being below the 1st percentile, he is now at the 75th percentile for language.
Yay.
It really, really helps. A good speech language pathologist, man, they are miracle workers.
They are.
And so I'm so grateful forever to, the speech language pathologist who literally worked with him through high school. He was her last client. She retired his last session. So,
oh, that's beautiful. I know Joseph had a long-lasting relationship with his speech pathologist as well. And she actually came to the book signing and spoke. Joseph invited her.
Seriously?
Yeah. So I get it. They become a part of the family.
Absolutely. And so with my older son, my older son has this capacity to dig into what's hard and just do what needs doing, he's unbelievable that way. Unfortunately, he puts himself into situations that he has a hard time navigating because he's just like, I'm going to do the thing. And which is, you know, incredible grit and resilience, but it does get him in trouble sometimes. My younger son was, as I said, a more effective self-advocate. So it was harder to when he would hit the hard thing, he would shut down or freak out. Whereas my older son would be like, this is hard, I need to work on it. Right. And so, so it was much harder to support my younger son because he needed the help. But then the people who were trying to help him, you know, he would get very overwhelmed and then, you know, get upset. And so part of my grief was about knowing that we weren't helping him the way he needed to be helped, knowing that what was available at the time to help him just wasn't what he needed, and feeling very helpless about that. And then also because he was so easily triggered, our whole family was walking on eggshells all the time. And so I had a lot of grief about that. The fact that our family situation was nothing like what I had thought parenting was going to be like. I mean, really, it was a mountain of therapy, and B, this walking on eggshells thing was hard. And I still have grief about that because it did have an impact on the rest of the family in a very profound way until we were able to get him the help, which frankly was medication that he needed. And, you know, for him, I remember just thinking, if we can just get him to 5 years old, then somebody will prescribe him something, because this is way beyond what he can, you know, strategies he can learn, right? He needed help. And I knew in utero that he was more reactive than my oldest. Oh my goodness. Yes. I was a mess while I was pregnant with him, like a big mess. I kept getting upset about the littlest things. I had to take a million walks around the neighborhood, and I was like, what is wrong with me? And so I have sympathy for him, because I know what it feels like to have those emotions, because I was having them when I was pregnant with him. And so, so I'm very sympathetic to how hard it was for him. You know, he was really struggling. And as a result, the rest of us were struggling and just feeling so helpless to help him.
Yeah. And those are, I always talk about how many layers of different emotions that we go through on our journeys, and that and I've talked about this before, but that you can be in all the stages of grief at once.
Oh yeah.
In a day, right? Yeah, you can go deny, you know, I'm in all, I can be all over the place in a day, depending on like what especially different stages of the journey of what was going on. And those rough times, eggshell living, stress, judgment, all of it together is a lot.
It is. And, you know, it's funny, Bridget, I teach a parenting class called First Put On Your Own Oxygen Mask. And
yes.
And I do give a talk. I know you had Dr. Rita Eichenstein on your podcast, and she wrote this fabulous book that I actually devote one session of my class to what she covers in her amazing book. And I have the stages of grief, you know, listed out on this one PowerPoint, you know, just 5 circles. And I have, you know, I said, people like to think it's like this progression through the stages. And then the second slide is a whole bunch of scribbles just all over the place, connecting them, because it's so messy. You can feel all those emotions even at once, right?
Oh yeah. I could be having a great day, and all it took was a phone call from the school, right? And I was hitting them all. Yeah. And also, you know, the fact that we do have a relationship with grief. I even name grief, and I have this whole relationship with my grief. Where is your personal grief at now with your sons?
So I speaking of mixed emotions,
Yes, yes.
right? We feel them all. It's funny when I'm fully in acceptance, and I actually talked to Rita about this one time. When I'm fully in acceptance, it feels so good. It feels so good because my kids can be who they are, and it's not my shit. Like, sorry to say it that way. It's not my shit. That's their shit, right?
Yeah.
And so I can just be like, oh, that's really hard for him. Okay, like let's figure our way through that, right? But it's not me going down there with him, or me feeling like I should feel differently than I feel because other people are judging him or me or whatever. Like, so it feels so good when I can be there, and I'm definitely there most of the time now.
That's great.
There are moments where like you said, I just get taken to my knees. And I actually had one of them a couple of weeks ago. My kids are both adults now, and they both are getting Medicaid waiver support through the state. And navigating that system is really awful. It's just really awful. And I get super angry about the fact that it is so difficult to navigate it and do it well. And so a couple of weeks ago, I got so depressed about the fact that there's no way my kids can navigate that system when I'm gone. There is no way. It requires a degree of executive functioning they are not capable of. And I can hardly navigate it, and I have really good executive functioning. And so, like, the fact that it's so hard for me, I just like, then I start projecting about the future and freaking out about all that, which is not helpful to anybody. My poor husband, one day I was just getting rageful. How hard it was. And one morning my husband, I got yet another email that just sent me straight over the edge. And my husband looked at me and he said, "Do you need me to take over? Like, do I need?" And I said, yes, I do. I need you to take over and just like make this stop being so weird and dumb. And he did. He called people. He made the right things start happening, and we're still dealing with it and navigating it 2 weeks later, but at least it's moving forward. So, I do have these moments still, but mostly I'm in acceptance. And like you, I always say the reason I started my business is so that no other parent would have to go through what we went through. If I can help any other parent like navigate the system with a little more ease and grace with themselves, for themselves and for all the people they're interacting with, including their children especially, that's what I want. That's what I want in my life, is to through my own experiences hopefully help other people have better experiences. And so another part of my thing is
let's talk about it.
Okay, so I am a co-author on this book, which is called Is This Autism? A Guide for Clinicians and Everyone Else. And it's with my co-author, Nana Henderson, and our friend Jamel White. And originally it was supposed to be a guide for clinicians, because Donna, as a neuropsychologist, realized that a lot of neuropsychologists are actually afraid to diagnose autism because, like the person who did our diagnosis, they're afraid of saying the word to parents, the word autism. They don't like saying that word to parents, and they feel very overwhelmed. They don't know how to help parents, and they don't know how to do the diagnosis. And I didn't know this. So the first person we went to who did not diagnose my clearly very autistic son did not give him that diagnosis because she didn't do autism. And so because she didn't do autism, we didn't get a diagnosis for another 4 years for him. And so Donna could see this happening in her profession, and she wanted to change the narrative. And she, in fact, was one of those people who used to say, I don't do autism, right? Now, I can tell you as a parent, you don't know that when you're choosing a neuropsychologist.
No,
you
you don't
know to ask, by the way, do you evaluate for autism as part of this? Because I didn't even know my kids were autistic. I didn't know what was going on, right? So you don't know to ask. And so she said, wow, this is a real problem. And she wanted to write the book. But one of the problems she's found is that a lot of people who do diagnosis, a lot of the books that guide you through the process are so technical and academic that most clinicians just like fall asleep while they're reading them. And so what we did with our book is that we wanted it to be very engaging and easy to read and relatable. And like, we wanted people to just like breeze through it, right? Like, we just wanted them to be able to feel, okay, I get it. I understand what reciprocity is now. I understand what nonverbal communication is, right? Like, just make it relatable. And we structured the chapter. So for the diagnostic criteria part of it, we structure each one what people think that criteria means. Then we say what it can also entail. We have lots of quotes. We have these sections called From the Experts, which are quotes from autistic people explaining what it's like for them to navigate whatever, reciprocity.
I love that. Yes.
So we had so many people, over 100 people, like, helped us understand what their internal experience was. And then Jamel helped us with the cultural competency, because what feels normal in my culture may not feel normal in the culture of, my friend Siru, who is from Ghana, right? Like,
yes.
Right. So she's going to have a different experience of what interactions might look like. Okay. And
yes.
so Jamel helped with that. And then we also have a section on co-occurring conditions, which, by the way, I think a lot of people, when they think about autism, they're actually thinking about those co-occurring things and not those core diagnostic criteria. And then a section that I love on autistic strengths. So that there's, the flip side of all these things that I've been talking about as challenges are also strengths, depending on the context. And
I love that.
Yeah, that was a really fun chapter for us to write. And it was hard. There wasn't much out there. Temple Grandin's done a lot of stuff on strengths, and there are a few people who have addressed it. And, we relied heavily on the work they'd done, but it was hard to find, anyone who had actually just written comprehensively about it. So, that was a fun chapter to write. I learned a lot writing that. So we learned so much writing this, like so much about like what autistic people are experiencing. And as part of the book, I kept, like, I'd learn something and I'd go home and I'd say to my kids, hey, I just learned about this thing today. Like, there's something called alexithymia, which means difficulty naming emotions. And a lot of people with alexithymia have trouble with internal bodily sensations. They don't recognize when they're hungry, when they're starting to feel anxious, when they need to go to the bathroom, which is one reason potty training can be so hard for autistic people, some autistic people. So they don't have that internal awareness. And so when they're having an emotion, it just kind of takes over their body and they don't realize it until it's gotten big. Right.
Okay. Yes.
And they don't have a name for it. So like for me, I know when my heart's racing and I'm, my palms are sweaty and I'm starting to feel flushed, like I'm like, oh, am I anxious about something? Something's going on here. Right. And I can name it pretty quick, but people who aren't aware that they're having those feelings may not know to name what's happening with them, so that they have a hard time understanding what's going on with their bodies and therefore their feelings. So I learned about that and I was like, whoa, I think my older son really has challenges with that, and went and talked to him about it. Like for both of us, it was a moment of, oh, this is a huge part of his experience, right? And so that's my hope for the book, is that parents, autistic people, family, friends, as well as clinicians, medical providers, just have their eyes opened to what those experiences could be, so they can have these really important conversations with the autistic people in their lives about what they are experiencing. Because boy, I'll tell you, once I understood that about my son, it really helped us and his therapist figure out, okay, now we can, if we know he's having trouble recognizing those internal bodily sensations, it's called interoception. Let's work on developing his interoceptive sense and then helping him. So that became, something that he could work on with his therapist. So anyway.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, I definitely am going to get your book because just that little teeny piece, I was like, wow, okay. That's an aha for me, because I mean, I didn't know the name of it. I didn't know exactly what that looked like. So I love that. And this is what this podcast is for, right?
Yeah.
So sharing knowledge, because it's what you said, Sarah, when you understood it, when you can understand something, then we can move forward and actually do something about it.
Right. We can be helpful.
Yes. Find answers. Yes.
Is the stage I feel like I'm mostly in now. So, we talked about acceptance, and yes, I do step into anger. I do step into depression. I do step into bargaining, like all of it. I have all of it, but I'm also making meaning from the experiences that have happened in my life. Yes. And that making meaning part is what you're doing with this podcast. It's what I'm doing with my work. And it's amazing for me to be, to realize I'm there now and able to step back from my own struggles and challenges and help people through theirs. But yes, it's such a gift to be able to do that. I'm just so grateful for it. And a friend of mine once told me, I told you I was a research psychologist at the beginning, and I had wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I did not know that where I went to school as an undergraduate did not have a clinical psychology track. They were only research. And therefore, my advisor did not know to say, you should apply to a school that has clinical degrees. So I went to a grad school that only had research. I didn't even know I was being tracked until about halfway through grad school. I was like, I'm not on the track for being a clinician. And I thought, oh no, but I loved what I was doing. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And I was bemoaning that confusion and the path it led me down to a friend of mine. And she said, Sarah, maybe that was the universe's way of helping you get real life experience so that you could be genuinely helpful to the people you work with.
Yes, I love that, because I do believe that the universe, tricky, but sometimes you don't understand the whys, but then when you do, it's like, oh, well, of course, that would be the direction that I would need to go, because you have no idea what's coming.
Right.
And I first of all, before I move on, where can people get your book? Where can I get your book?
Well, you can get it on Amazon. We have a website that's called isthisautism.com. So that's the title of the book, Is This Autism? And there's lots of information there. We're slowly getting stuff up on the website. So we have author bios, and we have some of the reviews. So many people. Rita Eichenstein actually was one of our reviewers. But Steve Silberman wrote a review and called our book a towering accomplishment.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I was like, Steve, Wow. That blew me away. And that actually helped us get through like all the irritating, like post-writing parts of getting the book to production.
It is difficult. It
Yes.
is that's tricky, but yay on your reviews. Just from what you've shared about the book, I am very curious about it. And it sounds like it has so much valuable information and direction to help us. And although Joseph is 31, I'm still learning.
Of course. Of
Yes,
course you are.
I'm still learning and he's still learning. And it's great when you can go to your adult child and have a relationship and be able to really openly discuss whatever it is
Oh my goodness.
that you want to share or they want to share to the best of their ability with you. And I think we've talked about, sometimes, and Joseph and I have talked about this, but sometimes when children with disabilities hear grief upon diagnosis, as a parent being disappointed in them, or it's something negative about the child. And so doing this grief series, and you're the last person I'm interviewing for this series, I don't want to end this series without talking about the intention behind that.
So important. And I will confess that when Cy wrote to me and said, "Are you interested in participating in this series on mother's grief?" I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be a toughie because of what you just said, right?
Yes.
And so I said, I actually want to talk about it and address it face on. Like, let's really talk about the fact that this is not grief about my beautiful child, my two wonderful, amazing boys. I do not have grief for the amazing people they are. What I have grief for is that they have to work harder to be in the world than other kids do and other adults. And I never wanted that for them. I never wanted that for them. I wish that I could take that away from them, and make it so that they would have an easier time navigating the world.
Yes.
Part of what makes them amazing, though, is that they've had to face that stuff and navigate it. And I actually think it's part of what makes them so incredible. But for me, that grief that I had to work my way through was about wanting their lives to be easier, wishing for more, for the world to just be kinder than it is. And, wishing that they would have an easier journey than I knew they were going to have.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very typical feeling for a parent, even if your child doesn't have any disabilities. You don't want anyone to bully them, right, or you don't want to see your children suffer on any level, although that is part of being a parent.
Yep.
But, we have these expectations. Well, a long time before I became a parent, I thought, oh, it's gonna, I never thought about the challenging pieces of it. So I think the grief is just the fact that we don't want our children to suffer, and our mama hearts are hurt because we know that life is hard anyway. It's just going to be a little harder. But my son, I know I can speak for myself, and Joseph and I are very close, and he knows that he is my best teacher, and I'm a better person because of my son, Joseph, and because of this diagnosis. So it's not about fixing or changing. It's about understanding and growing and growing together on this journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do, my kids are absolutely my best teachers, no question. And I fully agree with you. I am a much better person because of the experiences I've had mothering them and helping them figure their way through this world.
Yeah. So anyone who's listening that I know that it could be possibly misunderstood that we're talking about grief, as a mom on the autism journey, because it is grief. And we can sit here and pretend that it's not, or that we're not upset when our kids get this diagnosis, but then that wouldn't be transparent. It wouldn't be authentic. And I personally want to honor my feelings and my growth and how I got to being happier than I've ever been in my whole life right now.
Yeah. And, we talked about this before you started recording, and I really do think it bears repeating here, is that when we acknowledge our own emotions and work through our own emotions and come to a place of honoring the very real feelings we're having and understanding where they're coming from, I think it's very important that we do the work as parents, because then our children can grow to their own potential without worrying about the impact they're having on us, right?
Yes.
It's an enormous burden our children carry.
Yes, it is. And that I'm so glad that you brought that up and that we did repeat that, because that is, I think, the whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And so I, for one, am going to keep doing it.
Me too.
And we're going to keep doing our very best to be transparent and help other parents as parents.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. What would you like to mention before we go?
What I'm thinking is that two things pop to mind. So one is the Buddhist thing that is, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
I'm taking that in. Yeah.
So we're all going to feel pain, always. And it's what you do with the pain, right? And so I think that allowing yourself to experience the pain, that's a very Buddhist thing to do, right? It's like, okay, this is painful and hard. And you notice the emotion, you feel the emotion, you allow yourself to be in the emotion, because it's a message, right? It's a message.
It is.
And we need to tend to the message that we're getting. There is a really beautiful poem that I actually close my section on grief in my parenting, putting on your own oxygen mask class, which is a poem called The Guest House by Rumi.
Oh, I love Rumi. I've heard this. Yes.
So honoring each of those emotions.
I know. Very hard.
Because
take
they
your
are
time.
Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry. This is the topic. We all feel it.
Yeah, so they say the quote is, still honor each one, for he has been sent as a message from beyond.
Ooh, now you're getting me. That's beautiful, Sarah. That's beautiful.
So that's what I'll close with.
The Guest House by Rumi. And I think I'm familiar with that, and I'm going to revisit it because it is so powerful, and it's heartfelt. And anyone listening to this interview, I know you're feeling it too. And that's why Sarah and I were willing, our own free will, making the choice to share our own personal pain on our own personal journeys, to offer wellness and to offer all of you the support that I know that you're searching for. So I I don't have enough thanks to Sarah for being so open, so vulnerable, and the fact that you were willing to have this very important conversation, because this conversation is going to help folks, and it's really an important one that I believe we should have more of. So if this episode was helpful, if this grief series was helpful, Joseph and I hope you all share it, and let's help as many parents and moms and teachers and anyone who wants to know more about autism. Share this episode with them. And you can find Sarah. Where can people find you, Sarah?
So my website for my parent coaching business is Guiding Exceptional Parents, because we are all exceptional and our kids are exceptional. And so that's that one. And then I also have some online courses that I've developed with my friend Penny Williams. And that one is The Behavior Revolution. And so thebehaviorrevolution.com. And then, of course, isthisautism.com. So those are the 3 places you can find me.
Wonderful. And I know that you'll be hearing from some of our listeners. And also, I would like to hear from all of you. So if this episode was powerful, if it helped you, could you please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mother's Guide Through Autism, and please share, like as much as you can. Our journey is all about sharing knowledge, hope, and inspiration. And I will be back next week to sum up this grief series. And also, I'm going to be offering a very special group coaching program. And the group coaching program is going to be all about grief. We're going to follow it up from this series, and I will be giving you all the beautiful details in our next episode. If you want to keep up with everything, please go to mothersguidethroughautism.com and sign up for our email list. And that way you can stay updated, and I'll be back to show you and talk to you about the summary of the grief program and also how you can sign up for the grief coaching program. See you in the next episode.